On Easter Sunday, the 17th of April 1870, the 61-year-old Liberal Prime Minister William Gladstone attended communion at Harden Church. At the altar this day, he recorded in his diary, it was the Irish land question that I presented before God, more than aught else, living or dead. That afternoon, he wrote to the Lord President of the Privy Council, Earl de Grey, about the question of a charter for Keeble College, saying, I apprehend it may have some bearing on the course to be taken in Ireland when we come to deliberate about the higher education there. The moment offers important insights into the politics of 1870. At its broadest, it suggests much about the nature of Victorian political culture in the third quarter of the 19th century. Moving in, a closer focus reveals much about the politics and the preoccupations of Gladstone's Liberal government and its agenda for reform. An even closer focus uncovers those religious and political contentions swirling around the founding of Oxford's newest college since 1714, 166 years before. And in particular, it shows or reveals an interesting connection between the establishment of Keeble College at Oxford, a university which at that moment was becoming an increasingly pluralistic institution in religious terms, and in Gladstone's mind, the knotty problem of university education in Ireland and the appropriate relationship between Catholic and Protestant churches. Starting off with the broadest focus, Gladstone's diary forcefully reflects the extent to which religion and politics were intricately intertwined in 19th century politics. Politics was religious and religion political. It was a culture remarkable for the fervor of its religious life, personal piety being increasingly based on the intensity of experience, religion of the heart. So were tensions played out between passionate conviction and doubt, certainty and hesitation, confidence and misgiving, and militancy and anxiety. These fed into the often feverish relations between high church, Tractarian, broad church, low church, Anglicans, nonconformists, Catholics, and others. And perhaps most strikingly from our contemporary point of view, each of these religious groupings by the mid-19th century felt acutely under threat. Each of them felt imperiled in some way. And all the more so when, from the 1850s, German biblical criticism, scientific materialism, and rational positivism gained an increasing readership, prompting Tennyson to write famously that more faith existed in honest doubt than in unthinking adherence to religious dogma. British Protestants feared the rise of Catholicism. The number of Catholic priests in England increased threefold between 1845 and 1891. And in his famous Durham letter of 1850, the Whig and Erastian Prime Minister Lord John Russell had denounced papal pretensions. The people of England look with contempt at Catholic mummeries and superstition, and with scorn at the laborious endeavours which are now making to confine the intellect and enslave the soul. In 1868, to much publicity, the immensely wealthy Earl of Bute was received into the Roman Catholic Church, the Times calling the event a perversion. the result of a priestly influence acting upon a weak, ductile, and naturally superstitious mind. Benjamin Disraeli's novel of 1870, Lothair, modelled its eponymous hero on Lord Bute by way of showing the encroachments threatened by the Catholic Church upon English Protestantism. And indeed, Earl de Grey, Gladstone's correspondent about the charter for Keeble Chapel in April 1870, was received into the Catholic Church in 1874. Just 4 years later. Broad Church, Low Church Anglicans, nonconformists deeply distrusted High Church ritualism and the legacy of the Oxford movement within the Church of England associated with Edward Pusey, Henry Lydon and others, part of a legacy evolving into what became called Anglo-Catholicism. At the same time, anxiety about militant nonconformity dismayed Anglicans of all stripes. Radical nonconformists from the 1850s rallied round the Liberation Society, campaigning for the separation of church and state. The general election of 1868 returned a greatly increased number of nonconformist MPs to the Commons. And in 1870, a third of the Parliamentary Liberal Party favoured disestablishment of the Church of England. Moving the focus in to examine the policies and legislative aspirations of Gladstone's government, formed in December 1868, with a Commons majority of 112, the religious dimension of parliamentary politics lies to the fore. Every aspect of the Liberal ministry's reform agenda, from Ireland through education to regulation of the drinks trade, had a religious bearing. Gladstone himself, of course, personified the belief in a divine providence that sustained political endeavour. He held the conviction that he was God's frail human agent of historical change. The Almighty, he noted in his diary, seems to sustain and spare me for some purpose of his own. Albeit his temperament struggled with inner tensions between passionate emotion, vehement conviction, and an ardent desire for order and control. In his own words, providence shapes our ends, rough-hewn though we be. Hence, Disraeli's comment that he did not mind Gladstone believing he had the ace of trumps up his sleeve, but what did stick in his throat was Gladstone's conviction that God had placed it there. Gladstone's providential purpose in 1869-70 was Ireland. On being invited to become Prime Minister, he declared, "My mission is to pacify Ireland." He saw himself as destined to take up the issue of Ireland in the name of the God of truth and justice. Though in his diary he recognized, quote, "I ascend a steepening path." Gladstone's agenda for Ireland was threefold. First, the disestablishment of the Protestant Church of Ireland, an objective he achieved in 1869. Secondly, reform of land ownership in Ireland. After difficulty, an Irish Land Act was passed in 1870. Thirdly, the reform of university education in Ireland. That issue that he saw as directly relevant to the founding of Keeble College. In Gladstone's mind in 1870, the problem of Ireland was predicated on the assumption that a desire for social justice and civil liberty, not national independence or self-government, was the root of Irish grievances. Gladstone only secured the passage of his Irish Land Act in 1870, granting tenants a right to free sale, fair rent, and fixity of tenure, by drawing heavily on reserves of goodwill and driving the legislation through Parliament. It seriously divided Liberals. His premiership was significantly damaged. He felt, he confessed, like a bee dying on its sting. The Irish University Bill Gladstone introduced in 1873 widened those divisions, evident in 1870, into party disintegration. The bill proposed to refound the University of Dublin as an Irish national university, teaching and examining all students for its degrees. It would be financed from the endowments of the Protestant Trinity College in Dublin, from revenues drawn from the disestablished Church of Ireland, and by government grant. To this body, individual colleges such as Trinity, the Queen's Colleges of Belfast and Cork, and the Catholic Maynooth College would be attached. Controversial subjects such as theology, philosophy, and modern history, however, were not to be taught by the university, but taught by the individual colleges. So, Gladstone hoped, might religious dispute between Protestant and Catholic colleges be avoided. The measure drew immediate, widespread hostility. Many liberals objected to the university not teaching disciplines such as philosophy and modern history as, quote, gagging clauses. Radicals objected to a government-funded university being religiously segregated. Catholic Irish leaders objected to the bar to the National University teaching theology, describing it as the erection of a godless institution. Supporters of Trinity College, meanwhile, objected to its partial disendowment and subordination to a national university expected to become more Catholic over time. In March 1873, the bill was defeated on its second reading. Gladstone promptly offered his resignation as Prime Minister to the Queen. Such was the wider context for those forces swirling through the theological hothouse of Oxford University in 1870 as a charter for a new high church college named in memory of John Keeble was discussed. Its relevance to Gladstone's thinking about higher education in Ireland was clear. The far-reaching Oxford University Act of 1854 had included the abolition of the requirement for matriculants to Oxford to swear by the Anglican 39 Articles, the abolition of religious tests to the holding of college fellowships, and the establishment of private halls to enable poorer students to study at the university. It strengthened the authority of the central university over the colleges through a reformed hebdomadal council, and secularized the admission of students and the appointment of college fellows who were no longer required to take up clerical orders. It was in this pluralistic, indeed in some regards secularizing current then, that the setting up of Keeble College with its distinct high church theological mission challenged the latitudinarian and pluralistic aims of the 1854 legislation and the aims of Oxford University reformers. By the early 1870s, the temperature of debate within the university was further heightened by the appointment of a phalanx of high church clergy to theological chairs at the university. In 1871, the Tractarian J.B. Moseley was appointed as Regius Professor of Divinity, and the Anglo-Catholic Edward King appointed as Regius Professor of Moral and Pastoral Theology in 1873. And already in 1870, the Tractarian Henry Lydon, suggested by Pusey as Keeble's first warden, had been appointed to the chair of exegesis. Lydon was the most famous Tractarian preacher of his generation. Anglican doctrine, he declared, must be based on the authoritative creed of the early Christians. The real presence in the Eucharist must be recognized, and greater concern shown for, quote, the neglected poor. And in Lydon's mission and words, you can see the cradle of the mission and purpose of Keeble College as it then was then founded. Lydon was invited to become the first warden of Keeble College. He felt he could not accept the appointment, however, as it would be regarded as too controversial. Although he does note in his diary, held in Pusey House, that in 1866 it was he who conceived the founding of Keeble College. It then followed, as we know, that the young 26-year-old Edward Tolbert, a true son of the Oxford movement, was appointed the founding warden of Keeble College. And within Oxford more broadly, opponents began marshalling themselves to oppose the setting up of Keeble and its theological orientation. While the temperature of debate was rapidly rising within Oxford in the spring of 1870, Gladstone, meanwhile, during April and May, was guiding Keeble's charter through the cabinet. On the 21st of May, the cabinet agreed to a charter by incorporation into the university. In the months that then followed, Oxford opposition challenged in heated congregation debates the status of Keeble as being neither a college nor a private hall. It was criticized for its governance, i.e., governance by an external council, not by a governing body of fellows. And it was charged that its students were not entitled to the status of scholars of the university. And these were particular governing arrangements which were put in place by the founders of Keeble in order to protect its particular theological mission. As a dam, if you like, against the increasingly pluralistic and secularizing tide washing around the rest of Oxford and the other colleges. For Edward Tolbert personally, this led to some difficult, if not rather humiliating situations. Following his appointment as founding warden in June 1870, his right to attend meetings of heads of houses was denied. And it was not until January 1871 was Keeble's status eventually formally approved by congregation. Thus, it must have been a source of great personal satisfaction when, on laying the foundation stone of Keeble Chapel in June 1871, Tolbert was able to declare that all members of Keeble now enjoyed the same position and rights as members of all other colleges. In Easter 1870, Gladstone saw the establishment of Keble as an explicitly high church Anglican college within a pluralistic, increasingly secular university as a possible model for the fraught and complex reform of university in Ireland. He deliberately, consciously extrapolated from the particular governing arrangements and status of Keble at Oxford into his model and legislation for the Irish Universities Bill subsequently. Fortunately, however, the subsequent successful development of Keeble College avoided the abject failure of Gladstone's aspiration for Irish university reform. Thank you.